August 16th, 1948. Babe Ruth was dying in his hospital bed when three men in expensive suits walked into his room at Memorial Hospital. They weren't doctors, they weren't family. They were there to finish what cancer couldn't. Joe DiMaggio was visiting the Babe when he heard the elevator stop on the 7th floor at 11:47 p.m., 3 hours after visiting hours had ended. Security had been paid off, the night nurse had been sent home early, and the three men carried briefcases that didn't contain legal documents. When Joe saw them enter Babe's room, he knew exactly what was happening. Someone wanted baseball's greatest legend dead before he could reveal the secret that would destroy the Yankees organization forever. What happened in that hospital room over the next 20 minutes saved Babe's life and created a cover-up that lasted 50 years. August 16th, 1948, 11:47 p.m. Memorial Hospital, room 710. Babe Ruth had been fighting throat cancer for months, but the real threat wasn't the disease. It was the Yankees' front office secret he'd discovered, a financial scandal so massive it could have destroyed Major League Baseball itself, and powerful men were willing to kill to keep it buried. This is the untold story of the night Joe DiMaggio saved Babe Ruth's life, and how the Yankees organization buried the truth for half a century. Joe DiMaggio had always respected Babe Ruth. More than respected Babe, he revered him. The Babe was baseball royalty, the man who built Yankee Stadium with his home runs and his larger-than-life personality. So when Joe heard that the Sultan of Swat was dying of throat cancer at Memorial Hospital, he made a point of visiting whenever he could. August 16th had been a difficult day for Babe. The cancer was aggressive. The doctors weren't optimistic. Joe arrived at the hospital around 8 p.m., carrying a small bouquet of flowers and the latest sports magazines. "Hey there, Bambino," Joe said softly as he entered room 710. Babe's eyes opened slowly. His once powerful frame looked small and frail in the hospital bed. "Jolton Joe," Babe whispered, his voice hoarse from the cancer treatments. "You didn't have to come." "Course I did. Yankees look after Yankees." Joe pulled a chair close to the bed. They talked about the current season, about young players coming up through the system, about the old days when baseball was simpler. But something was troubling Babe. Joe could see it in his eyes. "Joe," the Babe said, glancing toward the door, "I need to tell you something, something important." "What is it, Babe?" Babe struggled to sit up higher in bed. "I found something bad, real bad." "Found what?" "Papers. Financial records. The front office, they're stealing from us, Joe. From all of us." Joe leaned closer. "What do you mean?" "The pension fund. Our pension fund. They've been skimming money for years, millions of dollars." Joe felt his blood run cold. The players' pension fund was sacred. It was their security after baseball ended. "How much?" Joe asked. "Near as I can figure, about $2 million. Maybe more." Joe whistled softly. $2 million in 1948 was an enormous sum. "Who knows about this?" "Just me. And now you." Babe gripped Joe's arm with surprising strength. "They can't get away with it, Joe. Those boys who played in the 20s and 30s, they need that money. They earned it." Joe nodded. "What are you going to do?" "I got a meeting scheduled with the newspaper tomorrow. Sports reporter from the Tribune. Gonna give him copies of everything." That's when Joe heard it, the soft ding of the elevator arriving on the 7th floor. Joe glanced at his watch. 11:47 p.m. Visiting hours had ended at 8:30. No one should be coming up to this floor now. "You expecting anyone?" Joe asked. Babe shook his head. "Nurses don't usually come around until midnight." Joe heard footsteps in the corridor. Slow, deliberate footsteps, not the quick, efficient steps of hospital staff. Something felt wrong. Joe moved to the small window in the door and peered out carefully. Three men in expensive suits were walking down the corridor. They moved with purpose, checking room numbers. These weren't doctors. They weren't family members. They were something else entirely. Joe had seen men like this before. During his brief involvement with some of New York's less savory characters in his younger days, he'd learned to recognize a certain type. These men were professionals, and they weren't here for a social visit. "Babe," Joe whispered urgently. "We got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that walks on two legs and carries briefcases." Joe watched as the three men stopped outside room 710. One of them pulled out a small piece of paper and checked it against the room number. They'd found their target. The lead man was tall and thin, with cold eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The second was shorter but broader, with hands that looked like they'd done serious damage. The third man carried a medical bag that Joe was certain didn't contain legitimate medical supplies. Joe had maybe 30 seconds before they entered the room. "Babe, listen to me very carefully," Joe said, moving back to the bed. "We're about to have visitors. Bad visitors. When they come in, you stay quiet and let me do the talking." "Joe, what's going on?" "I think someone found out about your newspaper meeting." Babe's face went pale. "You think they're here to—" "I think they're here to make sure you don't make it to that meeting." The door handle turned slowly. Joe positioned himself between the door and Babe's bed, his muscles tensed and ready. The three men entered the room quietly, closing the door behind them. The tall man with glasses spoke first. "Mr. Ruth, Mr. DiMaggio, good evening." His voice was cultured, educated, which somehow made him more dangerous, not less. "Visiting hours are over," Joe said firmly. "You need to leave." "I'm afraid we have some business to discuss with Mr. Ruth," the man replied. "Private business." "Then you can discuss it during regular visiting hours with his doctors present." The shorter man stepped forward. "This won't take long." Joe could see the bulge of a weapon under the man's jacket. "What do you want?" Babe asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The tall man set his briefcase on the small table beside the bed. "We understand you've been looking through some old financial documents, Mr. Ruth, documents that don't belong to you." "I don't know what you're talking about," Babe said. "Of course you do. The question is what you plan to do with the information you found." Joe stepped forward slightly. "I think you gentlemen are confused. Mr. Ruth is seriously ill. He's not involved in any business matters." The man with the medical bag opened it and began removing items, syringes, small glass vials, things that definitely weren't standard medical equipment. "Mr. Ruth has a meeting scheduled tomorrow morning with a newspaper reporter," the tall man continued. "We'd like to suggest that meeting be canceled." "And if it's not?" Joe asked. "Then Mr. Ruth's condition might take a turn for the worse." The threat was clear. They were going to kill Babe and make it look like the cancer had finally won. Joe's mind raced. He was outnumbered 3-1. They were armed, and Babe was too weak to help. But Joe had advantages too. He knew the hospital layout, he was in better physical condition, and he had something they didn't expect. He had nothing to lose. "You know what?" Joe said, moving closer to the tall man. "I think Mr. Ruth needs some rest, and I think you three need to find the exit." "Mr. DiMaggio, please don't make this more difficult than necessary." "Oh, I'm going to make it very difficult." Joe grabbed the tall man's briefcase and swung it hard at the man with the medical bag. The case connected with the side of his head, sending him stumbling backward. The shorter man reached for his gun, but Joe was already moving. Joe launched himself across the small room, tackling the gunman around the waist and driving him into the wall. The gun flew from the man's hand and skittered under Babe's bed. The tall man tried to grab Joe from behind, but Joe spun and delivered an elbow to his solar plexus that doubled him over. The man with the medical bag was recovering, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. He lunged at Joe with a syringe filled with something that definitely wasn't medicine. Joe caught the man's wrist and twisted until he heard bones crack. The syringe fell to the floor and shattered. But the shorter man was back on his feet and reaching for a backup weapon. Joe knew he had seconds before this turned deadly. "Security," Joe shouted at the top of his lungs. "Security, emergency in room 710. He knew the night security guard was probably 3 floors away, but he hoped the sound would discourage the 3 intruders. It worked, partially. The tall man was clutching his chest and gasping. "We need to go. Now." "The job isn't finished," the shorter man protested. "The job is blown. DiMaggio's here, security's coming. We abort." The man with the broken wrist was leaning against the wall, his face pale with pain. "This isn't over, Mr. Ruth," the tall man said, straightening his glasses. "The meeting gets canceled, or next time we come when your protector isn't around." "There won't be a next time," Joe said firmly. The 3 men gathered their scattered equipment and left as quickly and quietly as they'd arrived. Joe immediately moved to the door and turned the lock. Then he wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. "Jesus Christ, Joe," Babe whispered. "Who were those guys?" "Yankees front office cleanup crew would be my guess." "You saved my life." Joe was already moving toward the bed. "We're not out of this yet. They'll be back. And next time they'll be ready for me." "What do we do?" Joe thought quickly. "We accelerate your timeline. No waiting for tomorrow's meeting. We do this tonight. Al, you got those documents here? Some of them, in my coat. Babe nodded toward a small closet. Joe retrieved the coat and found a manila envelope filled with financial papers. He scanned the documents quickly. Even with his limited accounting knowledge, he could see the pattern. Money going in, smaller amounts going out. The difference was disappearing into accounts that had nothing to do with player pensions. This is enough to bury them, Joe said. But how do we get it to the press? Those guys will be watching. Joe was already forming a plan. We don't take it to the press. We take it to someone they can't touch. Who? Commissioner Chandler. Happy Chandler was the commissioner of baseball. More importantly, he was an honest man who couldn't be bought by the Yankees organization. How do we reach him? It's nearly midnight. Joe checked his watch. 11:58 p.m. I know where he's staying. Hotel Roosevelt. He's in town for meetings this week. Joe, you can't go out there, they'll be waiting. Maybe. But they're expecting you to stay here until tomorrow. They're not expecting me to leave with evidence tonight. Joe tucked the documents inside his jacket. What about you? Joe asked. You can't stay here. It's not safe. I'm not going anywhere. I'm too weak to move. And they know it. Peeb. Joe, listen to me. This is bigger than my safety. Those pension funds, there are hundreds of players counting on that money. Guys who gave their best years to baseball and got nothing in return. If I have to die to protect them, so be it. Joe felt a surge of admiration for the dying legend. Even facing death, Babe Ruth was thinking about his fellow players. Nobody's dying tonight, Joe said firmly. I'm going to get these documents to Chandler. You're going to stay alive until I get back. Bully. Joe moved to the small bathroom and returned with a straight razor he'd found in Babe's shaving kit. Anyone comes through that door who isn't me or a real doctor, you use this. Babe took the razor with shaking hands. I don't know if I have the strength. You're Babe Ruth. You hit 714 home runs. You can handle 3 crooked accountants. Despite everything, Babe smiled. Get going, Joe, and be careful. Joe moved back to the door and listened carefully. The corridor was quiet. He unlocked the door and removed the chair. Lock this behind me. Don't open it for anyone until I get back. Joe slipped out into the corridor and heard the lock click behind him. The hospital was eerily quiet. Only a few lights were on, casting long shadows down the hallways. Joe avoided the elevators and found the staircase. He descended quickly but carefully, listening for any sound of movement. At the lobby level, he peered through the staircase door window. 2 men in suits were standing near the main entrance. Not the same men from upstairs, but clearly part of the same organization. Joe needed another exit. He remembered seeing a service entrance earlier when he'd arrived. It led to an alley behind the hospital. Joe made his way through the basement corridors, following exit signs toward the service area. The service door was locked from the inside, but the lock was old and simple. Joe used his pocket knife to work it open. He stepped out into the alley behind the hospital. The night air was cool and humid. August in New York was never comfortable, even after midnight. Joe stayed in the shadows and made his way toward the street. A black sedan was parked at the mouth of the alley. Joe could see the glow of cigarettes inside. More watchers. Joe retreated deeper into the alley and found another exit that led to a different street. Hotel Roosevelt was 12 blocks away. In normal circumstances, it would be a pleasant walk. These weren't normal circumstances. Joe kept to side streets and avoided main thoroughfares. He ducked into doorways whenever he saw headlights approaching. By the time he reached the hotel, it was nearly 1:30 a.m. The lobby was deserted except for a sleepy night clerk. I need to see Commissioner Chandler. Joe told the clerk. It's an emergency. The clerk looked skeptical. Sir, it's past 1:30 in the morning. I'm Joe DiMaggio. This is about baseball business. Life or death business. The clerk's eyes widened. Everyone in New York knew Joe DiMaggio. Let me call upstairs. 5 minutes later, Joe was riding the elevator to the 9th floor. Commissioner Chandler answered his hotel room door in a bathrobe, his hair disheveled from sleep. Joe, what in heaven's name are you doing here at this hour? Commissioner, I need to show you something. Something that's going to shock you. Chandler invited Joe into his suite and poured 2 glasses of bourbon. What's this about, Joe? Joe placed the manila envelope on the coffee table. The Yankees organization has been stealing from the players' pension fund. Babe Ruth discovered it. Tonight 3 men tried to kill him, to keep it quiet. Chandler's face went pale. That's a very serious accusation. Look at the documents. For the next hour, Joe and Commissioner Chandler went through every piece of paper. The evidence was overwhelming. Systematic theft spanning nearly 10 years, money diverted from player pensions into private accounts controlled by Yankees executives. "My God," Chandler whispered. "How much?" "Near as we can figure, around $2 million. Chandler set down his bourbon glass with a shaking hand. This is the biggest scandal in baseball history. This could destroy the sport. That's why they're willing to kill to cover it up." Chandler stood and began pacing the small sitting area. "We have to handle this very carefully. If this gets out the wrong way, it could ruin baseball's reputation forever." "Commissioner, with respect, reputation doesn't matter if players are being robbed and murdered. You're right, of course, but we need to think strategically. We need to catch these people, get the money back, and make sure this never happens again, all without destroying public confidence in the game." Joe understood the commissioner's dilemma, but he was thinking about Babe Ruth alone in a hospital room. "What's the plan?" Joe asked. "First, we secure Mr. Ruth's safety. I'm calling the FBI. This is interstate fraud, which makes it federal jurisdiction." Chandler moved to the phone and began making calls. Within 20 minutes, he had FBI agents mobilizing and federal marshals heading to Memorial Hospital. "Second," Chandler continued, "we quietly investigate everyone involved in the Yankees' financial operations. We build an airtight case before we make any arrests." "How long will that take?" "Weeks, maybe months." Joe felt frustration building. "Commissioner, those men are going to try again. Maybe tonight." "Not if Mr. Ruth is under federal protection." The phone rang. Chandler answered quickly. "Chandler, yes? What, are you certain? I see, yes, keep me informed." He hung up and turned to Joe with a grave expression. "The FBI agents reached the hospital. Mr. Ruth is safe, but the 3 men you described are gone, no trace of them." Joe felt relief and worry in equal measure. Babe was safe for now, but the killers were still out there. "There's something else," Chandler said. "The agents found evidence that someone attempted to tamper with Mr. Ruth's IV medication earlier tonight." Joe's blood ran cold. The sedative. In a large enough dose to cause respiratory failure, it would have looked like natural complications from his cancer treatment. If Joe hadn't been there, if he hadn't interrupted their plan, Babe Ruth would be dead right now. "Commissioner, we need to move fast. They'll try again." "Agreed. Here's what we're going to do." Over the next hour, Chandler outlined a plan that was both simple and brilliant. Babe Ruth would be secretly transferred to a secure medical facility outside the city. The transfer would happen before dawn, with federal agents providing protection. Meanwhile, FBI accountants would begin a forensic examination of Yankees' financial records, and Joe would return to his normal routine, acting as if nothing had happened. "They'll be watching you," Chandler warned. "If they suspect you're involved in exposing them, you could be in danger too. I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can, but be careful nonetheless." By 4 a.m., the plan was in motion. Joe made his way back to Memorial Hospital through the pre-dawn darkness. Federal agents were now stationed discreetly throughout the building. Babe had been moved to a secure wing, with round-the-clock medical and security protection. "How do you feel?" Joe asked, when he was finally allowed to see his friend. "Like I just lived through the most important night of my life," Babe replied. "Did Chandler believe you?" "He believed the documents. FBI is taking over the investigation." Babe closed his eyes and smiled. "Those boys are going to get their pension money after all." "Looks like it." "Joe, I can't thank you enough. You saved my life. You saved all of us." Joe squeezed Babe's shoulder gently. "Yankees look after Yankees. Remember?" Over the next 3 months, the FBI investigation uncovered a conspiracy that reached deep into the Yankees organization. 7 executives were arrested and charged with federal fraud. $2,300,000 was recovered and restored to the players' pension fund. But the story never made it to the newspapers. Commissioner Chandler, working with federal prosecutors, negotiated a plea agreement that avoided public trials. The guilty parties served their sentences quietly. The money was returned, and baseball's reputation was protected. Officially, Babe Ruth died of throat cancer on August 16, 1948. The same day Joe saved his life. But that's not quite true. Babe lived for 2 more days after the hospital incident. 2 days of knowing that the pension fund was safe, that the thieves had been caught, that his fellow players would be taken care of. He died peacefully on August 18th, with Joe DiMaggio holding his hand. The last words Babe Ruth ever spoke were, "You did good, kid. You did real good." Joe never talked about that night publicly. Not for 50 years. Not until 1998, when he was 83 years old and dying himself. In his final interview, Joe DiMaggio told a sports reporter about the night he saved Babe Ruth's life. "Why didn't you ever tell this story before?" the reporter asked. "Because it wasn't about me," Joe replied. "It was about Babe, about doing what's right, about taking care of your teammates." Do you think the Yankees organization learned from what happened? Joe considered the question carefully. "I think they learned that players won't stand by and watch while they're being robbed. I think they learned that even dying legends can still fight back. And I think they learned that sometimes the quiet guys are the most dangerous ones." The reporter published the story in Sports Illustrated. It caused a sensation in the baseball community. Historians began re-examining the financial records from 1948. Everything Joe had said checked out. The Yankees organization, now under completely different ownership and management, issued a statement acknowledging the historical misconduct and praising Joe DiMaggio's courage. They also announced the establishment of the Babe Ruth Player Protection Fund, designed to ensure that such corruption could never happen again. Joe DiMaggio died 6 months after giving that interview. At his funeral, dozens of former players attended, men who had benefited from the pension fund that Joe had helped save. Men who owed their financial security to a night in 1948 when Joe DiMaggio decided to do the right thing. Commissioner Bud Selig spoke at the service. "Joe DiMaggio was more than a great baseball player," he said. "He was a guardian of the game's integrity. He showed us that true heroism isn't about batting averages or championships. It's about standing up for what's right even when it's dangerous." The story of that night has become legend in baseball circles. It's taught at the Hall of Fame as an example of player courage and integrity. It's used in business schools as a case study in whistleblower protection. And it's remembered by anyone who believes that sometimes one person can make all the difference. August 16, 1948. The night Joe DiMaggio saved Babe Ruth's life. The night the Yankees organization learned that stealing from players had consequences. The night that proved that even dying legends can still change the world. If this story of courage and baseball history moved you, subscribe for more untold sports stories. Hit that like button if you believe one person can make a difference. And comment below, what would you have done in Joe's situation? Next week, we'll reveal another hidden story from baseball's golden age, the secret that Mickey Mantle carried to his grave. Remember, the greatest games aren't always played on the field. Sometimes they're played in hospital rooms, hotel suites, and the conscience of a single person who decides to do what's right.